ጠዋት ልክ በጠዋት ልክ 12 ሰዓት ቤተክርስቲያን እንደሄድን ከዛን ደግሞ ልክ ወደ 2 ሰዓት አካባቢ ላይ ልክ ድምፅ ሰማን። ፍንዳታው ልክ ድዋን ያለው ወደሱ
የኔ ልጆች በጎች እያገዱ ነበረ። በጎቹ ጋር እኔ ልጆቼ ተበላሹ ብዬ ሞተውብኛል ብዬ ስሮጥ እነኛ ልጆች ስላየኋቸው ወዴት ነው ብዬ ደግሞ ስሮጥ አገኘኋቸው።
On March 10, 2019, a plane carrying 157 people crashed in this field in Ethiopia, about 50 kilometers from the capital of Addis Ababa.
That's 8 crew and 149 passengers has crashed shortly after taking off from Addis Ababa.
Debris and loss still linger.
Deepest condolences to the families of those that have lost their loved ones. It is the same type of aircraft.
The plane was a Boeing 737 MAX 8, one of the American manufacturer's newest models. It was the second 737 MAX to crash in less than 5 months.
The plane was delivered 2 months ago, a very, very new plane.
We've never seen 2 airplanes catastrophically destroyed with passengers on board so early in the service life of a product.
And in the aftermath, families and investigators are still searching for answers. Fault Lines traces what led to the 2 crashes and asks if American aviation regulators have allowed industry too much control over safety. The last time Baye spoke to his wife Elsabet, it was a Sunday morning. Elsabet was a flight attendant for Ethiopian Airlines. She was going to work on a flight to Nairobi and then return to Addis Ababa that day.
You guys look so happy.
Yeah, we've been waiting for a long time, you know. In the morning, she didn't even wake me up because my son and I, we were like, you know, I almost hugged my child and she don't want to wake us, you know. She told me later when she called me, she took our picture and she will show me when she come back, you know. And
It's okay. It's okay, take your time.
And before she on board, she called me and she told me that she wants to have lunch with me, so I should pick her up. And I said, okay, we'll do that, you know, it's Sunday, I got nothing to do, so I will do that. But she never come back. She never come back.
A few hours after he last spoke to his wife, Baye got a call from a friend asking if he had heard about a plane crash not far from the capital. He went straight to the airport.
I don't even know how to drive, you know, like I'm shaking. So this friend of mine, he took me to the airport and we started asking people whether they know something about it or not, like, and nobody knows anything, but everybody's crying, like. Then we waited for several hours and at the end of the day, they told us that there is no survivor.
The chaos and pain from that day have not ebbed. And there have been few answers for family members like Baye since the crash.
What was she like?
Man, she was everything. She was very humble. Very humble. Loving, caring. And my best friend. She was my best friend. Hello.
After the crash, it was too painful to stay in the home he and Elsabet lived in.
Hey.
So he moved in with her parents.
Who's that? Who's that? I couldn't go there. Who's that? I just can't. She's all over the place, you know, like, we paint the house together, we select the couch together. Literally, you know, everything in that house reminds me of her, you know, like, so mostly I don't go there. When you lost that, all your focus will be, you know, on the things that give you a little bit closure about you know, what you lost. So that's what I'm trying to do, trying to get closure.
But closure is far away. Less than 5 months before the Ethiopian flight went down, a Boeing 737 MAX crashed off the coast of Indonesia, killing all 189 people on board. But it was only in the aftermath of the Ethiopian flight that aviation authorities around the globe grounded the 737 MAX.
These are just a few of the 737 MAXs that are grounded around the world while investigations into the crashes and the design of the aircraft continue.
Some details have emerged bit by bit about what could have caused the planes in Indonesia and Ethiopia to go down. Software that could control the tail of the plane has been implicated in both crashes. But to understand the full story, it means tracing the history of the Boeing 737 MAX. In many ways, the 737 MAX was born out of competition. We've come to the Paris Air Show. This is the largest air show in the world, and a chance for the aerospace industry and plane makers to celebrate their latest creations and commercial sales. It was here in 2011 that Boeing's rival, European manufacturer Airbus, broke records with orders for their new plane, the A320neo.
Really is an historic announcement, the largest ever order for our A320 family.
So we talk about the airline space where we basically fly every day on the domestic flights and smaller or shorter intercontinental flights. And Boeing and Airbus dominates that 100%.
Airbus's A320neo was an upgrade of an older model, but with a new fuel-efficient engine, promising savings to airlines and catching Boeing off guard.
The fact that Airbus decided to re-engine, which is of course much quicker than doing a new aircraft, put Boeing into a decision. Do we stay with the plan to make a new aircraft, or do we actually go and also re-engine our NG platform, the 737 NG platform?
Facing a loss of orders to Airbus to large clients like American Airlines, Boeing decided not to make a new airplane to compete with Airbus, and instead decided to upgrade the workhorse of their fleet, the 737.
So this is the NG model.
Yes.
This is the model that the MAX was built on. This is the previous model.
Yes.
What would be different about a MAX than this model?
It would be essentially larger engines, sitting a little bit further forward.
One of the key selling points of the MAX to airlines was that it was just like 737s their pilots were already certified for. So they wouldn't need expensive training in a flight simulator. The MAX was certified by American aviation authorities in 2017 and became Boeing's fastest selling plane.
If you owned an airline and I said, I have a new airplane for you, it's very similar to the other airplane, and here's the price tag. Your response may be, yeah, but it's a new airplane. I've got to train my pilots, I've got to get simulators. It's a more expensive venture. Well, here's the good news. You don't have to train them in a simulator. Give them this little iPad course, they can do it at Starbucks. It's the same jet. Don't worry about it. Can you get the FAA to certify it that way? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then they're off to the races.
Welcome to Boeing 737 MAX Differences training.
The training was straightforward, on an iPad like this.
Features for the new variants include an extended nose gear, updated CFM.
They seem to be providing you with a lot of ancillary information. They don't seem to be fearful of inundating you.
But it didn't mention software on the MAX that authorities now believe played a role in the two crashes.
And you see where it says flight controls? Right there is where you would likely have MCAS if you were going to discuss it. Nothing. Totally absent.
On October 29, 2018, the first 737 MAX crashed. It was a Lion Air flight, and it went down off the coast of Indonesia.
What happened was that the aircraft behaved very strange for the pilot, and he was trying to master this. In my view, he was a more than average pilot in his mastering of the attack, or which we later learned was MCAS.
MCAS is a system that Boeing put on the MAX to counter extreme situations that could occur due to the new larger engines. In both the Indonesian and Ethiopian flights, the system kicked in when it shouldn't have.
He didn't know about the fact that there was a system which was actually meant to never be activated. It's a system which is basically there to help you in a very grave emergency, that this was triggering. And he mastered that. Unfortunately, when he handed over to his first officer to try to understand what was happening, and he told him what to do, the first officer wasn't prepared to the aggressiveness of the system they were fighting with.
The pilots on the Indonesian flight fought MCAS more than 20 times before the plane went down 12 minutes after takeoff. MCAS kicked in, forcing the nose down, thinking it was higher than it really was due to faulty data from just one sensor, called an angle of attack sensor. A few weeks after the crash in Indonesia, Boeing executives met with the Union for American Airlines pilots to discuss the software.
In this very building, Boeing came in on November 27th, and we questioned them. I think I might have been the one asking the question, how could you have designed a single point of failure? And they quickly came back with, it's not. The backup is you. And my response was, but we didn't even know the system existed. How could we be the backup for something that we don't even know exists?
After the crash in Indonesia, Boeing and the FAA issued a directive to 737 pilots around the world to use a known emergency checklist if MCAS kicked in when it shouldn't. According to investigators, the Ethiopian Airlines pilots followed that, but it still didn't save them.
The forces were too great, they were too unbalanced in the trim system that they couldn't then get out of that situation. And in my view, the emergency checklist, it wasn't enough. It should have mentioned things that caught the Ethiopian crew out later.
It's not just the Ethiopian airline pilots, though. Since the crash, other pilots have replicated the conditions of the Ethiopian flight in simulators like this. And some haven't been able to recover the plane using just the checklist.
It's already been demonstrated by our very own fleet manager pilots that this aircraft can be impossible to trim in certain flight conditions. Big difference from the very, now you may want to take an umbrella out today, it looks like it could rain, to there's a tsunami, there's a hurricane, there's a tornado.
Multiple investigations have been launched, including a criminal probe by the Department of Justice, to figure out what went wrong during the design and testing of the 737 MAX. But a former Boeing engineer who worked on the plane says it took place amid immense commercial pressure.
Can you talk to me about the environment while designing the MAX?
Cost pressure and time pressure was the biggest impact, biggest driver.
He spoke to us on the condition of anonymity due to fear of repercussions from Boeing for speaking out.
I believe we had customers that would inform us that if they couldn't get the airplane soon enough, they would go to an Airbus solution to their market need. So immense pressure on getting the airplane to market as soon as possible.
He says there was a pressure to keep the plane to the same regulatory requirements of the previous 737 model.
When you build an airplane based off of another airplane, differences add up to additional training. On the 737 MAX, there was constant pressure to not change anything. From a cost perspective, change costs money. Now, the business side drives the culture.
What creates the cost and schedule pressures is the constant pursuit of the bottom line by the leaders of the company and the leaders of the company of the board. And
Bill Rossetto worked at Boeing for 3 decades until 2014, and then worked at the union that represents Boeing engineers before retiring this summer. He didn't work on the MAX, but says that during his time at Boeing, changes at the corporate level led to shifts in the company's safety culture.
Boeing is looking to cut costs on both the top and the bottom of the problem. They're going to move labor to places where it doesn't cost as much to pay, and then they're going to cut their production costs and look for cuts in all their designs to reduce the cost. So the number one concern for their upper management is return on investment. When you're so targeted on return on investment because you're a business company, you know, and you end up taking safety for granted.
Details of the MAX's safety analysis by Boeing are still coming out, but some things have emerged in the aftermath of the crashes. Boeing's safety analysis didn't test for what could happen if MCAS was triggered by a broken or faulty sensor. It's also not clear if the company considered the impact of the software triggering more than once. Boeing declined an interview with us, but in a statement said they're focused on, quote, working with global regulators on testing and implementing the software update. But at the end of the day, in the system that's supposed to ensure our safety in the air, the final approval wasn't Boeing. It was the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, the government agency responsible for certification of airplanes.
We learned that the FAA never performed its own assessments of the system, and in fact that had delegated much of its oversight to the Boeing company. This was a complex plane, okay? And they hung new engines on, you did a lot of different things with a software system that wasn't even mentioned in the pilot's manual.
How did the FAA come to the conclusion that it was appropriate to certify an anti-stall software system, the MCAS, that not only drew data from a sensor that had a history of problems, but also that didn't have redundancy?
In addition to federal probes, since the crashes, FAA officials have been called to testify before congressional committees, asking if the agency deferred too much to Boeing for the plane's safety analysis.
The FAA welcomes scrutiny that helps make us better. As you all know, the FAA grounded the U.S. 737 MAX fleet on March 13th, 2019. That decision was based upon crash site findings and satellite data that together indicated some similarities between the Ethiopian and Indonesian accidents that warranted further investigation of the possibility of a shared cause.
In recent years, Congress and the FAA have delegated more safety certification to manufacturers like Boeing, an outsourcing of sorts. In fact, last year, 96% of Boeing certification was delegated to the company. Supporters of the system say that private companies know the latest technology better than government workers, and that the FAA isn't staffed to do the work themselves.
The system that delegates authority outside the walls of the FAA is a system that can work. And I've seen it work, and I believe in it. Whether it's executed appropriately is obviously under question.
They've taken it, as we've said, for over a decade, way too far, too fast.
Michael Perrone, the president of the union that represents FAA inspectors, agrees that the FAA needs to be staffed better for oversight.
The point is they have to have enough inspectors to oversee and regulate the industry. The industry has the expertise, the industry wants to continue to expand, that's fine, but they have to have enough regulatory ability in the FAA to oversee that that is occurring.
But the union is also concerned that the industry and the FAA are too close.
There are people that came from industry that are working in the FAA. There's people in the FAA management that want to go back to industry. Right now, industry is driving the FAA. Industry also says, I want to get this airplane out by this date, or I want to get this signed off by this date.
One of the questions facing various investigators now is if and how much that pressure impacted the certification of the 737 MAX.
These are highly challenging products to make and services to provide, so mistakes get made. The question is, do you have enough level of backup? And that's obviously what didn't happen. There wasn't enough backup, either in the decisions that were made or in the designs that were put out there.
As investigations continue into the crashes, FAA officials now have to account for how the agency's oversight system failed in the certification of the MAX.
We asked the question, and the FAA told us the answers to the question. Did you test the MCAS misfire, like happened with Lion Air in Ethiopia? And they asked, in the initial certification? No, we did not. And they went on to say that we didn't because the Boeing Corporation told us it was so transparent to the pilot that there was no need to test a misfire presentation. And what was even more horrid to hear was the FAA said, so we didn't. That's not oversight.
What were the steps the FAA took in reviewing the MCAS system and the accompanying training? Because I've asked it now 3 times. And I'd be blunt with you, sir, with all due respect, I haven't gotten a direct answer.
We will get that answer for you, sir.
What was the engagement in the system throughout the process in detail? Don't worry about boring me. We need to understand that because there's a critical component of this.
Yeah, I can assure you that the MCAS system was examined and certified because it was a new system to the MAX.
It was.
And we retained it, and we had the oversight of that, and we certified it.
Mr. Elba, I'm with Al Jazeera, show called Fault Lines. We're investigating this. Why did the FAA catch the problems with Boeing's MCAS system? I mean,
I think the body of the hearing just now should answer any and all of your questions.
The FAA declined an interview, but in a statement said the agency certification process has, quote, consistently produced safe aircraft designs.
Let's be clear, the system failed. That's the first step to repairing the system. The system failed. The system is Boeing, the FAA, other oversight areas from within those groups. It failed. What's the measure on that judgment? These 2 crashes. It's that simple. The system failed. It failed our passengers. It failed the globe.
The FAA is currently testing fixes Boeing has proposed to the plane. It's not clear when the 737 MAX will be back in the air and what it would take for passengers to trust it again. The system of regulations and oversight could almost feel abstract if it weren't for what's at stake.
Hey, Papa.
Baye and hundreds of other families know that too well.
Okay, let's walk. Come here.
What was she like as a mom?
She's the best mom you ever see, man. She loves her kid very much. Hello. How are you? You know, that's what scares me the most. Wanna push? I know how she used to care for her child, and will I be that father, you know, for him? Who's able to do both things, like a mom and a dad? It's not gonna make any difference whether I'm angry or mad or sad. Nobody cares about that. But this one is, you know, like bigger than me. What we're talking about, it's not about me, it's about everybody. We might don't have any power, you know, against Boeing or the FAA or something, but as a human being, you don't let things like this to happen, you know, all the time, and you get away with it. I mean, it's unhuman.